It's a combination of mercaptans and a hexaphene type chemical combination. They don't know exactly how it originated yet, but it was a combination of several influent flows that combined.
In layman's terms, those are found in petroleum and some other solvents. So fuels, and I'll be honest with you, we're investigating some events that may have been caused or may have precipitated.
And that's the one that goes all the way back to October.
The chemical one, yes.
When those clash together, that's what caused the event. They're by themselves, the plant could have handled them at one time, but when they clash together, it was like an explosion going off in the biological part of the plant and wiped it out, killed the plant.
The plant died within about 72 hours.
Yeah. And the recovery has been the issue. Has it been a combination of the recovery and some management issues?
Recovery takes time with the biological load that's being put on the plant, because you have to accommodate the biological load and reestablish the live bacteria and biological agents that decompose the waste. And then you deal with all the dead activity that's in there too. So it's a combination of everything, with the chemical influence, the biological demand, and the eliminating of the stuff that shouldn't have been in there to begin with once the plant was killed.
Yeah, the second fish kill, when we had the muddy discharge, that's exactly what it's talking about. It was the dead bacteria.
Right, and I think that was described to me as cleaning in the weirs at the time.
We thought that's what it was, but it was more extensive than that.
It's kind of like a yeast that heats up the,
Yes,
you know, in a small septic tank on people's, it's on septic, they put yeast cakes in there to keep it going and watch the detergent they put in there.
Well,
So we've got some
exactly
wrong
the same
stuff in there
thing.
that grow cars down the same way.
That's right.
You
Makes it
mentioned,
simple term.
you mentioned that the south plant failed or has had issues. Is that, since that was just new construction that we had done in there, is it something that contractor did wrong, or is it something that was not related to his work, or what?
That's a good question. We did a contract work, we replaced all those valves and those rusted gates that wouldn't open or close that allowed the flow in and out of that plant. There are two giant paddle wheels, if you will, and they run across a set of skids. Now those skids used to be redwood, they're now plastic. Half of that has failed, and that has to be replaced. We have those items on hand to replace, but we have to draw down that plant, empty it to make those repairs. That plant was built in 1954. It was taken offline long before any of you gentlemen took seats. We brought it back online as an emergency measure to be able to live out the challenges of our plant until a new one comes online.
How long will it take to make those repairs?
That's a good question. Jim, you get a feel for that?
We're putting half of that back online relatively quick. The repairs on the other half of the plant is probably going to take a neighborhood 2 weeks or less. We hope that all of the amounts to is replacing those plastic skids and readjusting the paddle wheels, tightening the chains, and things like that. We don't know that until we get all the way to the bottom.
So that was not some of the work we just.
It was some of the work. Yes, it was. Yes, the plastic, all that was put in new. And however, those plastics have failed before. They're kind of a poor substitute for the redwood, but they don't have the redwood like they used to have when the plant was originally built. But we're going to look at that as soon as we get it all drawn down and make a determination of what actually happened.
A further challenge we have is ODEQ has directed the utilization of the tertiary ring aeration process. That has not been in operation for some time. We pull the switch and it doesn't work well. And Ron can explain that process as well. But we're looking at a 50-year-old plant, 55-year-old plant, and it is breaking down. We've always known that we had this problem, and unfortunately, the Randolph Bridge syndrome has now hit the wastewater treatment.
Okay. How long before we can handle that 5-inch rain?
We'll never be able to handle 5-inch rain in a facility. It'll always go through. You just can't do it. It's not big enough to do it. It'll Never has been able to do it.
That happens everywhere.
That happens everywhere. Then when that happens, you have an emergency discharge. That's an act of God, and it's an emergency discharge system. If you're gonna have one, it's good to have a big one.
And they understand, I mean, it happens in every plant when it's overloaded with fresh water. The good news is it's fresh water.
It's really diluted that.
Yes.
That isn't, that, in what you're telling us is this next trigger that could invoke the higher powers other than ODEQ, a rain event would not
Would not
qualify.
precipitate that, no.
Should not, because that's an emergency event, and that happens anywhere in the country.
Okay.
When we look at the new plant being built, maybe it's really,
Well, Robert, at best case,
Bids are, bids will come in April the 15th. It's in full operation, built in operations 2 years.
2 years from next month.
2 years from when they start.
Yeah. Which is probably 2 years and 2 months.
yeah, we're in the unenviable position of trying to gauge how much investment to make in a plant we're going to abandon in order to keep it safe for the 2-year period. However, the consequences
Yeah, that's.
of failing to do it correctly are severe.
Yeah,
Okay, so how much are we talking about spending?
That's a good question.
Well, if you're talking about the management, having that plant run by other sources for however long period of time, temporarily right now, we're probably talking about $250,000.
For how long?
Probably till July 1, 3 months.
The repairs and
That's
runs?
repairs.
Oh, that's repairs and,
Unless we find something we can't see right now. But that, even that should not be that much more money at all. They're looking at about $250,000. That's
last
that.
time we didn't bid a contract, I said I very strongly disagree with doing that. I understand this is an emergency, but I would say we wanna see it come back to a bid the next fiscal year. I'm not saying you don't use the same company, but you wanna find out who else is out there and what ideas they have and what